Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Pep Guardiola and Jose Mourinho faced off at the Etihad as Manchester City hosted Spurs. 3 points were crucial for both sides, however, it also served as a precursor to the Carabao Cup final. In the end, the game ended 3-0 to City thanks to goals by Rodri and a Gundogan double. The XG indicated it was a well-deserved win, 2.46 to 0.42. The XG time map showed that from start to finish, City created the better chances. But what tactics did both managers use? Let's take a look. And if you want even more content whilst helping to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/footballmadesimple. You'll get early access to videos, exclusive videos, as well as access to the upcoming FMS video podcast. A reminder of how both managers lined up, courtesy of our video sponsor, OneFootball. Pep lined up in a 4-3-3, whilst Mourinho stuck to his 4-2-3-1. To get match updates, lineups, stats, news, and more about your favorite teams and players, check out the OneFootball app. It is the best football app for your phone, and the best part is you can get it totally free through the link in the description below to support the channel. Now, let's start with what City did in possession. City, as always, looked to initially build up short through the centre-backs. They usually came through the first phase relatively unchallenged, as Spurs tended to sit in a deeper 4-4-2 block, with Lucas, from in behind Kane, initially covering Rodri, then pushing forward as the City centre-backs played. This lack of pressing was shown by Spurs' passes per defensive action of almost 20. And City generally did look to build with a back three at times. Cancelo early on stayed deeper as the right centre-back, with Zinchenko moving into the midfield. This may have been to mitigate the threat of Son's pace in behind on the break. Perhaps this is why Laporte started ahead of Ruben Diaz to give City a left-footed centre-back in the wide left positions, although Diaz recovering from illness may have been the main factor. And this back three could also be formed by Rodri dropping in, Zinchenko staying deeper on the left, or even Edison pushing high, with the key always being maintaining a 3 vs 2 advantage against Spurs' frontmen. As City settled into the game, we more often saw Zinchenko and Cancelo move into the midfield three, with both also capable of moving wide to create wide overloads. This allowed Gundogan and Bernardo more fluidity, and Gundogan tended to move higher between the lines, and Bernardo tended to drift wide to the right instead to get more space, especially when Son was drawn in towards Cancelo. And we see elements of this in their average positioning. And with Lucas having moved high on the press, if the Spurs front two were bypassed, Højbjerg and Ndombele in the first half, later replaced by Sissoko, would often find themselves outnumbered, especially when Jesus also moved between the lines. This often meant if the pivot stayed deeper to compress the space, Zinchenko and Cancelo would have time and space on the ball, and they were highly influential, having the most touches for the side and being in the top 3 for passes completed alongside Rodri. But if Højbjerg pressed, Gundogan would be left in acres of space between the lines and would often look to then feed Foden, with Zinchenko also moving wider. If Spurs didn't move across to cover, Foden, Zinchenko and Gundogan consistently combined expertly using this left-hand side triangle, as when Tanganga was drawn out, Gundogan would then time and again make expertly timed runs into the half space, drawing a centre-back or Højbjerg across. This led to several promising situations, as City could then cross or pull it back into the space vacated. We see elements of this in the penalty. Zinchenko has moved wide, and Jesus has rotated with Foden, with Gundogan high in the half space, initially tracked by Højbjerg. The ball goes wide to Jesus, drawing Tanganga, creating room in the half space that Gundogan attacks. A ball into the space and Gundogan is brought down for the penalty. To a certain extent, Gundogan's second goal shows shades of these principles. Gundogan is the deepest man with Sterling wide and Foden in the half space. The wide pass draws Sanchez and Foden's run draws Tanganga, creating space in this region. Gundogan has a sense of goal and attacks the space to then finish. But at times, Spurs compacted the space well, and City would create a left-hand side overload, with Bernardo and Jesus also moving across in support. As Spurs shifted across, it would naturally leave Sterling in space on the right, and City would consistently look for the switch to isolate him against Davis. And he caused Davis consistent problems, completing a number of dribbles against him and looking to whip low passes in. And to get a better idea of what Cancelo's influence in this game was, check out this video which is linked now, in order to prevent this one from being too long. And when City lost the ball, with so many men high, they were generally able to counterpress efficiently, particularly when the Spurs forwards were also defending deep, as they would have less of an outball. This is shown by City's relatively low passes per defensive action. City did look vulnerable at times though, as Rodri would often be the sole defensive midfielder. A Spurs man would usually pick up the ball between the lines and then look to play in a runner. But what did Spurs do in controlled possession with 39% of the ball? Spurs would generally drop two centre-backs into the box with the full-backs higher and wider. City positioned themselves, ready to press, with Jesus outside the box and Bernardo in support, which at times would force Spurs long when they didn't want to take risks. But once they were behind and forced into taking risks, they would go short, and a City winger was often drawn in narrow to press the second centre-back. This would then often open up the route for Spurs to play into a defensive midfielder and subsequently to the flanks. And higher up, City also tended to defend in a 4-4-2 shape, with either Foden or Bernardo pushing high to join Jesus. If Gundogan also looked to press a pivot, it often left City vulnerable between the lines. Tanganga generally pushed high and wide early, and as a result, Lamela could tuck in to be the spare man in midfield, and he, or Kane dropping in, would pick up the ball between the lines, and Rodri often found himself outnumbered. However, City were generally able to put out the threat higher up the pitch. Overall, this was a dominant performance by City, with Spurs struggling to create much from open play. It put City 8 points ahead, and Spurs are still in contention for 4th place. It will be interesting to see if Spurs can take their revenge in the Carabao Cup final. But what did you make of the match today? Drop it down in the comments below. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.